You're listening to Get Tilted, only on Fantasy Now Plus.
Welcome back to Get Tilted, the Fantasy Now Plus DFS show. We're here in a new space, working through a little bit of a scenery change. But we're here today because the DraftKings pricing has just been released. So we wanted to talk about that early, get the reactions in, and honestly, we just couldn't wait to talk about DFS.
A lot to talk about. Just kind of talk through the season of DFS in 2026, some things that we've been thinking about, some things that we have been learning over the off season and want to apply to our games moving forward.
Yeah, there's been namely one really helpful video that you sent over to me, Tim, that we both checked out, and it really opened our eyes to a lot of new strategies, honestly, and just new thought processes heading towards this DFS season. And this is one by DFS Army. Huge shout out to them for pulling up all this data, and honestly, they came up with, I think, six notes for DFS and how to find a winner. Yeah. So I want to talk about that. Let's pull that up.
This video came out and it was more or less along the lines of, this is going to change how you play DFS in 2026, and it was about 25 minutes of pure data.
All right, and here we are. Here is the shape of a winner.
First one he brings up, favorite QBs. They are generally better than underdog quarterbacks, but if you want to go a little contrarian, there's not any real numerical problem to go underdogs. You'll win less of the time, but it's not like to such a degree less that it's like harmful and you need to actively avoid. And he'll let you know in the video as well the types of builds that you actively want to avoid, things that are winning 2% of the time, 3% of the time, stuff like that. So the fact that he brings this up, you can kind of go either way. Probably still want to lean favored, but like if you're building 10 lineups, you should probably do 6 favorites and 4 underdogs, or 7 favorites and 3 underdogs. Not necessarily 10-0 one way or another, but certainly leaning towards the favored a bit more. And kind of paired with that, whatever QB you decide to take, you should stack with 1 to 2 pass catchers. We kind of know this, but it's now kind of drawn out in the data. You want to stack, but you don't want to overstack. You don't want a 3-person, you don't want 3 receivers or 2 receivers and a running back, anything like that. Whoever your quarterback is, you pick at most 2 pass catchers, probably only 1 though. Like he in the video kind of mentioned, skinny stacking is honestly better unless you have like a really high point total and the game just like absolutely shoots out, and we'll probably know those games ahead of time, or at least have a better idea based on spreads and game totals and stuff like that. The big thing that we really want to point out here is trying to avoid the wide receiver 1 in these stacks. He really stresses the tight end 1 as being like a really great way to do it. The wide receiver 2, if you think there's a wide receiver 3 with some kind of strong projectable role, or like has a good matchup, or there's rankings out there of like who is the worst against slot receivers, who's the worst against number 1 corners, who has shut down number 1 corners, stuff like that. So kind of using that as background, but really going into, you don't need to over focus on a game, but you also do need to actually build out like a couple core stacks. You can see that kind of in the bottom left there. 2 clusters in particular of games, but across your whole lineup, you should be sampling from 5 to 6 games for the most part. You don't want to build a lineup. I know you and I loved to do this last year of just like, we had whoever the Cardinals were playing, it was Brissett, it was Wilson, it was McBride, and then we had like 2 or 3 bringbacks because their defense was awful. And like sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't, but like that was like 6 or 7 of our 10, 11 starting positions on the roster, and like we didn't really expand out enough, and the lineups were just kind of dead on arrival if the Giga game that we looked into didn't do anything. And he's kind of saying like, hey, that's very rare for you to just have like you needed 7 players from one game. Like that just doesn't really happen. So you really want to be selective. You need to have 1 to 2 core games. If the Lions and Cowboys are playing in a week, you probably want 3 to 4 pieces of that game for sure. But that's it. Just 4 pieces. Like don't overthink this. Don't get ridiculous with it. And then you pick another game that has maybe 2 to 3 players from it. And then you're just taking one-offs for the rest of your drafts. And that's really what they recommend in this research. And I think that's really interesting to kind of talk through. What are your thoughts on that?
It is like fascinating to think we had done so many lineups and not once did we kind of like pause ourselves and be like, I feel like we're taking too many people in the same game. Because I feel like the trap of, especially whenever like the Bengals are involved, right? Like, especially last year, you're like, surely 6 players from this team will, like, from this game rather, will crack like highest totals, right?
Yep.
And that just doesn't happen. Like, it kind of can't. I mean, sure, we got that like Bengals Steelers game where everybody in their mom had points, but realistically, when you think about it, yeah, I mean, there can only be so many points, even if there's a 50-point game. Like, you can't, realistically expect to have to hit every single auto ticket.
Yeah.
And when 2/3 of your roster are in the same game, and it's a 1:00 game, good luck with the rest of the day, right? Yep. So, I mean, I think that is both. It's helpful to find the statistics and the numbers behind it to back up the idea that like, no, you shouldn't be over rostering like games, and yet it feels almost like like give yourself more shots, give yourself more dart throws across the league. Don't just buy into one game. So like, to me, I think that's like almost like a good reminder check to be like, there's going to be games with like a 55-point over under. Don't feel inclined or pressured to have half your team in that game. Like, make sure you hit those few other games that are relatively normally, I guess the lines are more normal, because you still will find value there. And that kind of led to another point, which isn't really here. You mentioned it's just in that video, like not every high scoring game that Vegas projects is going to hit that.
Yeah.
Like, realistically, again, not everything Vegas says is perfect. They're pretty dang close to being perfect, but they don't always hit. So, don't be afraid to attack some of the lower projected scoring games. The last one I want to talk about is just like the QB stack with the wide receiver 2. Yeah, like, again, I am the biggest culprit of always going, all right, let's go. Like, Jacoby Brissett, Michael Wilson, go. Like, especially towards the back half of the year. Yeah. That typically worked out, but if there were games where like everyone would have had that, but no one had Brissett and, say, oddly enough, Marv,
yeah,
like, you were going to be a differentiated like roster, and you would have had more of a shot to crack the top 100. So relying on the bona fide wide receiver 1 is good for those small tournaments, like where you really want to hit as chalk as you can. But for larger field stuff, like, you have to give yourself a shot to have a different type of wide receiver make a play that game, and then give yourself a shot to have something really unique against the entire field. Like, I think that's just like, again, such an amazing like post-it note that's strapped to your monitor. You're like, it's not always Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, it's not always CD. It's not always Jefferson. Like, making sure you're diversifying your rosters like that is like beautiful. It's like chef's kiss.
Yeah. And if you think it is, don't take the quarterback. Just take them by themselves. And like, that makes sense when you really like think about it, of like, they're the wide receiver 1 because they're always getting 100 receiving yards every game. But if the quarterback is going off and getting 300 plus passing yards, it's probably because someone else is also going off. It's not all going to the wide receiver one, it's going somewhere else. So in theory, yeah, if the wide receiver two is having a good game and we just assume that the wide receiver one is having a good game, in like the Bengals example, like, yeah, Jamar Chase probably went for 150 and 1 to 2. But if T. Higgins went for 125 and 1 to 2, like, that's when Joe Burrow is going to actually be valuable. That's when he's 300 plus, 3+ touchdowns. We've got bonuses, we've got yardage stuff hitting now. Like, that's when you want Joe Burrow, regardless of price. And so it really does make sense of you want the secondary pass catchers because that's when your stacked quarterback is probably going off. Like, you don't really care that much about how many times Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow go off because Chase, even an exceptional wide receiver game is 200 plus receiving yards. That's awful for quarterbacks. That's nothing. Like, that's still 100 plus yards from a bonus. Like, you're just relying on touchdowns at that point. Like, you need multiple pass catchers to hit in the same week for your quarterback to hit unless they're a running quarterback. But I do want to touch on the other 3 points of this still, because I think these 3 that we have yet to talk about are actually probably the most important of the 6. First one I'll talk about, around 126% ownership. And this is, there's 9 players total. I went and counted while you were talking. We start 9 players on DraftKings, 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, and tight end, defense, and why am I losing it now?
Flex.
And a flex. I was thinking of showdown. I'm like, kicker? No. Flex.
Captain?
Yeah. Across 9 players, you want a total of about 126% or less projected ownership, and plenty of sites that you can pay for. Some sites might be free. You can watch dozens of YouTube streamers on Sunday that will have ownership projections on their screen. You can build through that. You can pay for a tool, however you want to get to that point. But the way that you win a lot of money is by having a cumulative projection ownership total of 126% or less. And something that's not on this graphic, but he stressed very highly in the video, is 4 players at least with it less than 10% projected ownership. So, even if they're all at 9.9%, that's still not even 40%. And that still gives you 80% ownership across the other 5 players to get you in the ballpark. So you don't have to fade chalk. You can eat chalk, but you don't want to eat too much chalk. And you also don't want to just flat out go contrarian for the sake of it. You don't want to take a tight end 2 that has 0% projected ownership and is projected for 3.5 fantasy points just for the fun of it. Like, that's probably not going to work. Like, even over 150 lineups in a week, like, you can get very creative. You can get very low ownership without having to go into like the absolute cavern of available players, and thinking through like how we want to build that. Maybe you take a wide receiver 3 instead of the team's wide receiver 2, or you're taking a low owned tight end 1 that is not the fancy play and not the popular play. And quarterbacks already just spread out ownership better than basically every other position. So like quarterback, you can't really get too unique on, but for the most part, like quarterback is a decent way to just be different. And another thing that he mentioned was cheap quarterbacks are kind of the meta. Talking kind of about that bottom right point, what they're talking about is in 2023, about 20 to 25% of all winning lineups had an expensive quarterback over $7,000 on DraftKings. Last year, it was 3%. And on the reverse, quarterbacks under 5,000 scored in a winning lineup last year at over 22% of the time. So the meta just entirely flipped last year. Could be because of Jacoby Brissett, if we're honest. But there were also games of, like Bryce Young had a 500 or like a 400 plus yard passing game. Once you and I talked about this on stream, like Russell Wilson had a random 400 plus yard game. Like
week 2 against Dallas. We'll never forget that one.
There was a Joe Flacco week in there, and Joe Flacco, when he was starting for both the Browns and the Bengals, was pretty affordable. Like there was a lot of quarterbacks, and there was a lot of quarterbacks that like weren't the best score on the week that were on winning teams. But because they were so cheap, they just afforded you so much flexibility elsewhere that you were able to get to the winning players that way. And I think that's kind of the larger point, is just like no quarterback separated last year. Like you had 2 giga 40 plus 50 plus point weeks, one from Josh Allen, one from Trevor Lawrence. Those were the only 2 weeks where really there was like a true separator at that position. Josh Allen, obviously you paid up for, but like everyone else, 6K, 5K, 5.5K, like everyone was just kind of the same. And so if the NFL meta continues down the direction that it's been heading, 12 personnel, 13 personnel, more running back involvement, we're starting closer, so yardage is going to build up less over time because, every drive starts at like the 35 now instead of the 20. Like yardage is gone, huge passing games are kind of gone, and you have to pay up for rushing quarterbacks, and all the rushing quarterbacks didn't rush last year. So if you think that meta changes, that's something that you can personally think to exploit, which might be something that is worth talking about as we get into the season. But for the most part, there's no reason to pay up at quarterback. And that's kind of what that bottom right point is really talking about, is just you can get more value out of a cheaper quarterback than you used to be able to, which also allows you to be more flexible in the flex on who you're playing. Positions kind of don't matter in the flex from what the data that they pulled. There was a lot of double tight end that worked last year, but in the most part, that's also how you get unique, is you're picking players in the flex that aren't just like, and I've got $3,300 left, who can I grab? It's like, well, I've got $5,600 left. I can grab a lot of players. Who do I want to grab?
Yeah, like the 2 points on the right, the bottom right hand, I feel like they go really hand in hand. Going a cheaper QB allows you to kind of buy into the no cheap running back ideal. Yeah. Right. Like you now have the confidence to run both. I'll call them expensive running back, high value running back, because you need them. There's so much uncertainty, like from a week to week standpoint, regarding all those backups, that there's really no reason to try and like gamble on them and like try to see like, all right, maybe this is the week that like Blake Corum finally breaks out. I think you just pay up for Saquon and just call it a day. Like I feel like that you can rest easy, and then when you have a cheaper quarterback, you then again feel more comfortable paying up for the 2 running backs, and then the rest of your lineup feels not nearly as gross.
Yep.
And the shifting of the NFL as a whole, like just like you mentioned, the game is just like a tiny bit different, where the few yards you get on the kick return that matter, like drives are shorter, players can get more drives, and QBs can do more. They don't need to have heroic drives every single time. Like so that allows like Tyler Shuck and Jacoby Brissett and even Marcus Mariota to like be huge DFS plays for nothing. Yeah. It's just a super interesting look at DFS as a whole. Like evaluating all of those rosters really does like open your mind up, as, not to be totally, you know, out there with it, but it it does give you a chance to kind of take this moment before the season starts to be like, all right, let's look at this holistically. Let's look at how the game is played, how it was played last year, and even 2 years ago. Where's the NFL going, and where can I start to gain advantage, like on a roster building mentality? So, like like, please check out their video. It was so good. I do want to have us actually jump into DraftKings and start looking at some of these prices, because you know, what better way to cement some new knowledge than just implement it right away? So, and any closing thoughts on the shape of a winner, the 6 points here?
Honestly, I think the main thing, and you kind of touched on it, is just stop worrying about the cheap running backs. Like just stop. You know, even the stone minimum running back is $5,000 on DraftKings. Like, think of how many wide receivers you can think of that hit last year at like 4,200, 3,600, all this kinds of stuff. Like, you can always get cheap at wide receiver. You can always get cheap at tight end. You can never get very cheap at running back. And like, is paying the stone minimum for an injury replacement running back that you hope gets 18 touches in a game, like really truly going to allow you to do that much more than like playing Jonathan Taylor and Christian McCaffrey and then just playing a cheap tight end instead of Brock Bowers and Trey McBride? Like, I don't think so. Like, I think it's best to just, you know, running backs used to go early in fantasy drafts and are starting to do so again for a reason. Like, they are the most projectable volume. They are the safest floor, still have very high ceilings. Like, these guys score points. Like, the only reason they don't score points is injury or like really weird game scripts that are just flat out not predictable. So I think, you know, this year we've just got to stay away from the like, oh, but RJ Harvey's 6,200 or whatever. Like, no, just stop. Like, just stop. It's not going to happen.
This is the Tyler Algier week. We can feel it. I know for sure. This is what it's going to be.
Yeah.
Link down below so you can all check it out. Please do. Fantastic stuff. Honestly, it's probably going to be super helpful going forward.